Okay, today is Tuesday, April 7th, 2026, and this is the Senate Committee on Institutions. And today we'll be discussing three items. First one will be H550, an act relating to gender equity within Vermont's correctional facilities. Second item will be H559, an act related to the parole board. And then we'll get an overview of the capital bill, which we have not yet received. We look forward to receiving it at some point in this process.
Third reading today.
Okay.
It just passed it.
Yeah. It's passed.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
By the whole.
By the house, yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Today, yeah.
Good. Thank you. Okay, so we'll get it in a couple of days. Because we have a couple of new people, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Wendy Harrison, chair of this committee, and I represent the Wyndham District.
And I'm Robert Plunkett, the Bennington Senate District.
Joe Major, Windsor District.
From Russ Eagles as this district. John Benson, the Orange District.
Okay, and so we're on H550, and we did have a walkthrough, and we heard from the presenter, and the testimony that we're going to get today is really valid. I'm looking forward to this very much. Kalani Gagne, who's a formerly incarcerated person, and if you would like to come and be on the witness chair, and then just identify yourself for the record. And
Kalani April Gagne. So to give a little background on me is that I was born in 1966 in Hartford, Connecticut, and moved to Vermont probably when I was around 5 years of age. A lot of my journey, I feel like, in incarceration really started as a child. I had a lot of trauma in my childhood in regards to my mother, being, as I put it, very authoritarian. But also, a father that was not there, he was there, married, but was not there mentally or psychologically for not only me, but my siblings as well. And by going through that as well, I've also had a lot of trauma in regards to things that happened to me as a child from multiple men and from some babysitters. And there's no where to turn or anything like that. And I began using at about the age of 8, drinking with a cousin on weekends. And that pretty much progressed rapidly until about 12 years old, where I started to smoke marijuana on a daily basis. And then the other gateway to hallucinogens and narcotics and cocaine and making, cocaine to smoke. And that was a lot of the trauma, was to cover that. That's why I did the drugs. And because I had nowhere else to turn, I didn't know who to go to. And then all throughout that, as a small child, I also knew that I was not in the right body. This is not who I was. I was supposed to be like my sisters. I didn't understand why. Growing up in the time that I did, in the 70s, there certainly wasn't that language or in a small community in Vermont to have that. And so that was just another part and piece of my addiction. And so that went on for quite a while, for really my whole life. And the reason I was incarcerated, through other times of being in trouble, and a lot of it was due to my drug addiction and not talking about these things that had happened to me. And for me, it was the only way to keep myself safe. And really, at about the age of 13, my addiction transitioned into, it was no longer for the trauma that happened to me. It was to protect Kalani. I was very different. I was very feminine. And as you can imagine, it was not very easy to have those qualities growing up. So I did drugs, and that was the only way to keep me safe from a world that I felt like I couldn't be part of. And that led to different, involvement in the law here and there. So this last incarceration, which was, I received 25 to 40 years, all suspended about 16 years. for an aggravated assault, unlawful restraint, and stealing the motor vehicle from the victim. And that began my journey into Vermont Department of Corrections. In the Vermont Department of Corrections, when I identified and committed my crime, I was housed in a mental facility. And as soon as I was convicted, I went to out of state the next day. I was shipped out of state the next day. My first facility out of state was Kentucky. I went to Kentucky, to Michigan, to Pennsylvania, to the last one being Mississippi, that were out of state facilities. There really isn't a lot of oversight in these facilities. 3 of them were for-profit prisons that are traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So their care and the quality of those institutions are not very high. The one state facility was Pennsylvania. And so in Kentucky, it wasn't too bad. I still identified with my birth, and it was very hard. You know, I had gainful employment there. I was a kosher cook, and I also worked in maintenance, and it wasn't that bad facility. I mean, for me, as who I was then, it wasn't that bad. There wasn't a lot of things I can say bad about it. Then we got to Michigan, and in Michigan, it's kind of like where I finally came out. And it was out of really, literally life's necessity, because I had intended to kill myself. I had enough drugs. I had the razor blades and a noose, and I couldn't live as this birth person anymore. That was not who I was. And there was a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of depression. And the drugs just weren't keeping it at bay anymore. And so I had to come out, but where? I can't. So I decided this was my best option. I went to call members of my family and let them know that I'm just saying goodbye. They don't know why, but I'm just saying goodbye to everyone. My daughter was going to be the last one, who was 13 years old at the time. My sister April was the one before, and she knew something was wrong because I don't use the word goodbye. I generally just say bye, because goodbye to me is permanent. And she said to me, she goes, I know you won't tell me what's going on, but just remember I love you. And then I called my daughter, and I could see my cell from the phone that I'm talking on. And when I called her, I realized something was wrong with her. And then I asked her what was wrong, and she said nothing. And I said, well, just because I haven't been there for almost 8 years, you're part of me, you're part of my flesh and blood. I know something's wrong. And she had told me that, she had told her mother that she was attracted to girls. I didn't care. And I said to her, for me, it was like, it didn't matter. But I didn't understand, like, I'm looking at my cell and I know what I want to do, but yet this little girl needs me. And what am I going to do? Am I going to be selfish? Am I just going to take the easy way out? That's how I felt. And I said to her, I said, I can sympathize and empathize with you. And she's kind of a smart kid. And she said, well, there's a difference. Sorry, your cat died. That's, sympathy. How are you empathetic with me? And it was kind of like I'm standing on this mental precipice, looking down at the abyss. What do I do? Do I walk away and do what I want to do, or do I save my daughter? So I jumped off and I said, well, Daddy's not gay. Daddy is a trans woman. And she was like, oh, that's great. I have some transgender friends. And so I knew then that everything was going to be okay. It was going to be easy. And from that moment on, so much of being me was finally okay. It didn't matter what was going to happen after that. A lot of this anger and hatred towards the world that I had always felt kind of just started to slip away, because now I was me. And at the end of Michigan is when I told the state of Vermont caseworkers that I was identified as a trans woman. And because there really wasn't much time left there, and they had a hard time keeping mental health providers there, there's no sense of trying to get on HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy. So as soon as I got to Pennsylvania, which was a state facility, we were interstate compacted, which means technically in Pennsylvania's eyes, we were convicted in their state. That's what interstate compacting is. Vermont no longer had control over us. They gave that up. So they did not have to follow DOC policies for Vermont. They didn't have to follow anything in accordance to Vermont. And I was able to reach out and talk with the psychiatrist and my caseworker, and a therapist that I identified as a trans woman. And through that, you go in front of a committee and they talk to you and they vet you to make sure that you're not confused, because there can be co-occurring mental illness going on. There could be just body dysmorphia, not gender dysphoria, which are two different things. So there could be other mental illnesses that are going on. So they want to make sure that you really are, identifying and not confused. And so part of it was I had, things from the street on psychiatrists that I'd seen in regards to talking to them. And so I was able to get on HRT, and that started for me. And that was really kind of liberating to finally be able to have that. And it still wasn't going to be easy. But my whole concern is that, that had me to reach out to Troy was a lot of the abuses I'd been seeing when I got back to Vermont. But in Pennsylvania, they had the computer thing there on the TV screen where there'd be other transgender women from the state of Pennsylvania that were housed in male facilities. And once a week you would meet, you could discuss things, because there is that connection of what you're all going through in this environment. And that really helped a lot, in Pennsylvania, there was 3,000 inmates. I was housed in a unit that was predominantly probably 98 to 99% Pennsylvania inmates. For me, a lot of the problems started when I got to Mississippi. When I got there, they were not very kind, and I'm talking to staff. And they certainly did not look upon transgender women with any kind of light. When I got there, a month after I got there, I had found out that my oldest sister, had signet cell ring carcinoma, and they gave her a year to live with a 10% survival rate. And I'm going through this, and the unit manager there continually would put sex offenders in my cell. And one of the times that she did that, she put the sex offender, who is a serial rapist, convicted many times in Vermont, who had sexually assaulted many people in the state of Vermont Department of Corrections in different facilities. And she had told the CO to make sure when she got back on Tuesday, it was Thursday, when she got back on Tuesday, that person still better do my stuff. And it's going to be gone Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and be back on Monday. So she was very concerned for my safety. And she had reached out to a captain, and the captain came down and removed that gentleman from my cell. And Tuesday, when I came back, the unit manager called me into her office, and she'd asked me, who do you think you are? Of course, I'm like, Kalani Kokane. And she explicitly said, you know what I mean? I'm like, no. And she said, asking me why the person wasn't in my cell. I said, that wasn't my decision. And then she looked right at me and said, I hate white people in your kind. And I said, okay, so white people isn't my kind then. So what is my kind? Because I'm Jewish or because I'm a trans woman? And she said, all three. And I said to her, well, if I'd known that, I would have bought a ticket, because I just hit the trifecta. Because trying to make a light out of that. That was the atmosphere in Mississippi for me. DOC refused to bring me back to see my sister. I hadn't seen her at that point in over close to 9 years. They refused to bring me back. My words was I wasn't allowed to be in Vermont. That's how I felt that they were telling me, though I was, charged, sentenced, or convicted and sentenced in the state of Vermont, and then a Vermont resident since I was a child. And so that was hard to deal with. And then dealing with being told that I was an abomination to God, that Satan is my father, that I deserve to die. All these horrific things. And this is staff that is saying these things. And Vermont DOC knew this. I reported this to them. I had people that I was kind of friends with there that did report these things to Vermont Department of Corrections when the out-of-state case workers would come down. And I reached out to Prisoners' Rights. I said before, I reached out to them, and the investigator, I wrote a 27-page letter to this man documenting all these things that have been going on with me. And the worst part of it is my sister's dying. And 3 days after she died, when the sexual assaults took place in the beatings. And you're trying to deal with your sister's death. And then this is going on. And nobody wants to protect me. There's nobody to keep me safe. The staff knew what was happening, and they turned a blind eye. When Vermont Department of Corrections out-of-state caseworkers came down, they would see my face, the color of the rainbow. I was a cutter. They would see my arms freshly cut. And they would say, "Oh, I see you fell in the shower again." That was the reception from my own state. So you begin to feel like you're not even a human being anymore, that you're not worthy to be protected. You're not worthy of anything. Because if I was even human, when I deserve the respect and dignity to be protected. So that's all going on just after my sister died. And got to a point where I always fought. And I've had 2 major surgeries. I had a complete reverse rotator cuff replacement. So now it's just my deltoid. There's no ligaments. And then I had surgery on this, trying to protect myself. And now I couldn't even protect myself anymore. So there's another whole psychological thing that you go through that you must want it because you're not fighting. But I just couldn't fight anymore. I couldn't. I didn't have the strength anymore. So it was very, very brutal, violent attacks against me. And I figured this is just my life, and somehow through it all, for me, is at least I was still calm. At least I was free. I was still me. And Vermont, there's people that reported it to the out-of-state caseworker. My niece, who was a very fierce advocate for me, was reached out many times through email and text messaging with an out-of-state caseworker that ran the out-of-state case unit, to no avail. I had multiple faxes that I sent to him and other people in DOC. I reached out and I did the grievance process, and Commissioner Demo at the time did not even respond to any of the grievances that I had written. So once again, there's nobody there to protect you. And it was really hard to be there, knowing that nobody wants to protect you. And I can't even protect myself anymore. And finally, there's one person who saw what was going on. I've been friends with this person since I met them, and would not take no for an answer and asked me what was going on. And from that moment on, he had gone to each person and said that if they ever touched me again, that they would deal with him. Because of the respect that he commanded of who he was, then my abuse stopped. Even when he went in the next housing unit across the way, people still knew not to touch me. And that was at least it ended. Almost 6 months of living like that finally ended for me. And it was an inmate that protected me, not DOC. And Vermont DOC was going to send us all back. Every transgender woman left, I believe in 2020, towards the end of 2020, to go back to Vermont. I was the only transgender woman left in Mississippi. Do not know why. but I was the only transgender woman left there. So until March of 2022, March 21st, 2022 is when I actually left Mississippi to go back to Vermont. And through all this that I went through, I became drug free for the first time in 46 years of my life. I was finally free. I'm going through this and I'm drug free. And I realized that it's going to be okay. I don't know how I'm going to make it, but it's going to be okay. And for me, as I talked with Troy, that's when I realized what I really wanted to do with my life. I think Hashem showed me, God showed me like what I needed to do, that no other human being should go through something like this, whether you're a trans woman or cisgender woman, cisgender man, or whatever. Like nobody deserves to go through that. And I need to be an advocate. I need to make differences and policy, and hopefully that things can change. And March 22nd was 6 years of my sobriety celebrated. And when I got back to Vermont, I was first housed in Springfield because I think there was a COVID outbreak in Chittenden Regional Correctional Center. And so they weren't taking anybody just then. And when I first got there, I went through the booking area, then they send you down back. And I went to, I believe it was in June, and they housed me with this person. And I went down to the CO and I said, I can't live with somebody. And I explained to this gentleman a little bit of the trauma that I've been through. So he called, I don't know what they called in Vermont, S1, called them and they said, well, you know, put me in segregation and protective custody. And this gentleman was like, she's not saying she's afraid. She's saying she's very uncomfortable due to the things that have happened to her. And that person said, well, the only way you're going to get a single cell is in PC. I don't know the definition of that, protective custody.
Oh.
So I stayed, and the next day they put me over in Charlie unit. It's actually a unit. And that is a single cell unit. It's kind of like medical unit, but yeah, you can still be okay on your own. And that's where I stayed until I went to Chittenden Regional. And in Mississippi and Pennsylvania, Mississippi, and even in Springfield, all the horrible things that happened in Mississippi, not one time was I ever misgendered. Within 2 minutes to 3 minutes of walking in through the doors of Chittenden Regional, I was misgendered 3 times. There was a gentleman sitting there and I asked him, you know, who are you? And he was an S1. And I said, you don't hear what is going on? He said, no. And that was the environment that started in Chittenden. The officers there, they were not held accountable for misgendering. Many times they were given the pass. You know, mistakes happen. And yes, they do. But I know when somebody is intentionally saying it to hurt me. I know when somebody makes a mistake. Because when you make a mistake, you quickly catch yourself. And when I talked to this assistant superintendent, he had said, well, Colleen, you do have a very deep voice and mistakes happen. And I was like, it's not really an acceptable answer to me. So there was no accountability for the way that their staff was. They always had, to me, like a bye. Well, you know, mistakes happen. Yes, but when it happens from the same correctional officers over and over again, then therefore it's not a mistake anymore. And living in the environment that I was in, I knew I was never going to be sexually assaulted again. In the female facility, I felt very safe. But it's very different in a psychological, mental aspect. And the assistant women were never held accountable if they misgendered you or if they spoke inappropriately to you. And in one instance, I was living in a 4-person cell, and this one roommate was calling me gay and other very derogative terms, and talking about my body parts and saying if I was gay and I was this person, then why didn't you just stay a man? And why do I have to live with you? This went on for a good half hour. And the CO could hear this in the gay room. Sent me to go to timeout in a sense to the what they call it, closed custody visiting. I'm not sure what they call that, but in that visiting room where you don't have non-contact visiting. And I wrote a grievance, and I was in the kitchen one day, and the officer came in and asked me to come into the office. Do you know why I'm here? And I said, probably to investigate my grievance. And he said, well, for one, this is not a PREA. Two, he goes, I'm really good friends with, I know this person really well. And three, they felt like if anybody could get this person to be honest, it would be me. And I looked at him, I said, that's 3 red flags. And I just walked away. They refused to do anything to this person. They did not put a PREA on this person, which it totally fell within the guidelines of PREA. And when the federal PREA lady came, I think it was in October of 2022, I reported to her what had happened to me. And within that week, that person received a PREA and keep apart from me because of what she did. So whether Vermont DOC doesn't understand the PREA policy or they're not quite sure what it is, I don't even know. So all these things were concerning to me. So the reason I reached out to Troy was I was very concerned in the Vermont Department of Corrections self-identifying as a trans woman and then simply allowing these transgender women to go to Chittenden Regional Correctional Center. They did not, I feel, properly vet them in the way that I felt that they should. When I was there were 6 of us, and I was the only one that was not a convicted sex offender. There was a rapist, and the rest were child molesters or pedophiles. And there was 3 individuals specifically that had come to me and said that the only reason they came here and identified as a woman was so they could do all that they could do before they got kicked out of the facility. So if you're vetting these people, that was my concern with Troy. Why isn't mental health, a psychiatrist, a therapist, a social worker with extensive knowledge in gender dysphoria and working with transgender individuals making these decisions? I don't know who is making the decisions, but to me, certainly not being properly vetted. And it's not just about me being protected as a trans woman or other trans women being protected or transgender men. It's also the cisgender women needing to be protected, to need to be preyed upon by people who have predatory behaviors. And it was very concerning to me because of the abuse that I saw continually going on there, and nothing really was being done. 3 of those individuals did get sent back to the male facility. As I brought up before in the House Committee testimony, that there was one person that just in the time frame I was there had to have at least committed 2 to 3 dozen PREAs. And I felt like the PREA is not being investigated properly. When I was in Mississippi, not one time did the state of Vermont Department of Corrections PREA lady reach out to me and ask what happened to me. Vermont DOC did not make them even or ask them if they had contacted local authorities, the sheriff, police department, the state police. They did not mandate them to do that. And so there was never any investigation from them. And if you're the PREA lady in Mississippi, is following the Vermont Department of Corrections. So through these private prisons, where I was housed was the state of Vermont. That was the state of Vermont. So I fell under their policies and procedures and grievance procedures and everything like that. And so all these abuses I'm seeing, why aren't these being addressed? It was very concerning for me. I think it's very, you're being too progressive in my sense. That's my words. That you're not doing your due diligence in properly vetting people. And I feel everybody needs to be safe. Everybody has the right to have that safety. And when you have people that are misbehaving that way, I don't know the process. I don't know the procedure. I do not know what they're supposed to do. I know that there are mandated reporters. Every one of the persons that works in DOC is a mandated reporter. You are to report these things. I'm not sure if you did report this to the PREA lady. If you did, then why did this person have over 2 to 3 dozen Prius in the 2 years and 3 months that I was there? Why could, and I wasn't there for almost 2 years. How many was there before? When people would be caught engaging in that behavior, why weren't they removed from the facility? These are all my opinions. I don't know. I don't have a right to know their process. But knowing what clear guideline is that this is what you're supposed to do. And so I was very concerned that there isn't proper mandated reporting going on. And I don't know why. I thought that the outside authorities were supposed to also be notified in regards to the Prius that were going on, as well as not only the sexual assaults, but as well as physical assaults. And there really wasn't, for me, as a transgender woman there really wasn't many people I felt connected with their staff. It was only through the DIVAS program at Chittenden Regional Correctional Center that finally an investigation into the sexual assaults, the rapes, the beatings that were going to be investigated finally. It's because of her. And if it wasn't for DIVAS, then nothing ever would have come about it. And I spoke with the PREA lady in the state of Mississippi. And through her, I found out that she's not even allowed into Tallahatchie County Correctional Center. Of every prison in the state of Mississippi, that's the only prison she can't go into. The federal PREA lady, why is she not? She is the state PREA lady, why is she not allowed in there? And they wanted to bring me back to Mississippi, and they were going to house me in the same facility so I could go in front of a grand jury and give testimony. And I will say that for the superintendent, assistant superintendent, the chief of security, they did say that's not going to happen unless she's put in a female facility. She is a female inmate in Vermont. She will be housed in a female facility in Mississippi, so they would not agree to that. So that's why they refused to send me out of state.
So then you have, obviously you're out now.
Yeah,
And so when was that?
I was released July 13th of 2024.
All right. So that's just 2 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And one instant in the environment that I just think they're not properly educated in regards to transgender individuals. I know, like, when the other transgender women had come back, like, they were just kind of thrown upon Chittenden. Like, there was never any preparation. There was never, like, probably you should have talked to the cisgender women and what was going to happen, what was going to go on. And one of the this gentleman that identified as a trans woman that had put in my cell, and literally was like the spitting image of one of the men that had sexually assaulted me in Mississippi. And I went to the administration and they refused to either move that person or me. And so for 60 hours, I couldn't sleep. The only time I got any peace was when I went to work. This person would like rip their shirt off and act very masculine and act very aggressive. And they would go out to the day room, as I call it, and peacock themselves in front of all the women. And I would tell the CO, like, are you not going to say anything? This is inappropriate behavior. What they're doing is inappropriate. And they didn't do anything. They did not have the person accountable. And it wasn't until the chief of security came back and I talked to him and told him, and he knew exactly the gentleman I was talking about that I was housed in Mississippi. One of the gentlemen that was in Mississippi that did this to me. And that day he moved me out of that cell. And when I went to talk to the assistant superintendent, I'm sitting here, he's sitting across the desk, which is really like right there. And he went like this and he said, Kalani, you do understand that's not the man that raped you. And I kind of looked at him like, I didn't know you were a psychiatrist. I didn't know you had knowledge of CPTSD. And I said, thank you. And I got up and I walked away. So this is the protection I got, even in Vermont. And I wanted to create something better than the policy that Department of Corrections had in regards to a policy to keep not only transgender individuals safe, but to keep the cisgender individuals safe as well. To go through, like I had mentioned, it was like the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, the New York State Department of Corrections, the Ohio State Department of Corrections, the Rhode Island and Massachusetts Department of Corrections, the California Department of Corrections. They go by WPATH, WPATH is what they call it. And that is, they set these guidelines for institutions to follow. And to get properly treated for medication, gender dysphoria, you have to have a gender dysphoria diagnosis. A nurse can't give you that diagnosis. Even a general practitioner can't give that diagnosis. Yes, you might work, but have you worked extensively with those people? And if you haven't, then how can you make that diagnosis? The medication, the HRTs that you give can change the body. It can be detrimental. So my concern was making or having some form of a committee with mental health professionals that have the knowledge of gender dysphoria, have the knowledge of working with transgender individuals, a person from like the women's advocacy, a person from the LGBT community, as well as the Department of Corrections being part of that committee because they are in charge of safety, and security of that facility. And that was my main concern, that I saw the lack of going on. And I feel for me that you're really doing a disservice to the transgender community by doing that. For me, it's kind of like my president wiped away my rights. Either you're a male or a female. I don't care if you've had the operation. If you were born male, you're going to be a male. That's the environment we live in. So it's very different, I'm sure, in the federal system. It doesn't go
Right.
what it used to go
Right.
by. Like some of the stuff I had looked up in regards to that. They don't go by that anymore. And so it's very concerning that there needed to be a clear cut policy.
Right, and it's great that you reached out to Troy, and
Yeah.
now we're working on
Yeah,
that policy, and so those folks that you mentioned are all part of this process.
yeah.
So I appreciate you telling us your story,
Yeah.
and just explaining what happens in different situations, and some of my takeaways are just the importance of having the diagnosis.
Mhm.
That's critical, because some folks might use that for their nefarious means. So there is a way to deal with that. So that it's very helpful. Do folks have questions or comments? I mean, you're sharing a lot, and that's brave.
The biggest misconception, some of this testimony I did here, is that there's not like this great look down upon if men will say that they are a woman. It's not like they're going to be looked at badly. Knowing both sides of the coin and being housed in their facility, I have heard many of them say that they would just say that they are women so they can go to the female facility and do their time. So there's not.
Because I think it's easier.
There's not a stigma of saying that, because, as I said, that's where the abuse comes in of what they're looking to get out of self-identifying. Yeah. And that's why I said, Troy, it's a slippery slope of doing that. And that's why, there needs to be proper vetting. And Troy, it was amazing. I really, truly felt heard. I felt heard and seen. He listened to me and he said, well, I have a bill for that. And I would give him information that I felt would be pertinent to him, and what would be nice to see some of the language changed in regards to simply a licensed professional. That could be anybody. If you're a licensed masseuse, that gives you the right to make a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So to have clear cut language is really nice. I
Okay,
think
that's a good suggestion.
Korea policy that I see that they had put in the language is vastly different than anything I've seen before. And I think that's very important. And I'm very happy to see some of that language change in the bill. Is there other things I would have liked to see? Of course, but this is the start. This is the first,
Right,
I think, change in policy, transgender policy, I believe since 2015, if I'm correct. You know, and I think Vermont has a really good opportunity because I don't see it's a matter of if, it's going to be a matter of when they have to build a facility for the females.
we have,
And
yes.
therefore, I know
We should have done
Yeah.
it years ago.
Colorado
It's-
is one of the first states that is implementing a transgender housing unit
Oh, that's interesting.
in the male and the female facility. And it's wholly voluntary. You don't have to go there. But if you don't feel safe and for some reason you can't go to a female facility, then you can opt to go to this transgender unit.
Right.
And there you feel safe from the cisgender men population. And I think that's very important that you have the ability to do something like this and to make a real big change. And I do believe that Troy really brought a lot of great points in the importance of changing this. And Gina did an amazing job presenting it to the House floor. And it's nice to see that this process from the very beginning, reaching out to Troy and seeing where it's going. And my thing is, that's why I hope you understand the importance of this bill is to protect all, not just trans rights, but cisgender rights, and making sure everybody is safe. And seriously, having mandated reporting, you need to do this. You need to follow through. And there needs to be guidelines. And if you do this, then that's something you need to go back to the main facilities because you do not know how to do it appropriately. And
Yeah, that's our responsibility. I mean, that's our job is to make sure that people are safe and hopefully getting either therapy, I mean, not just trans folks, but just learning skills and exiting and not coming back to the facility. So
oh, sorry.
I think that's, I mean, what are you doing now? Are you working or?
Well, because
I mean-
of the injuries I had with work when I came out, I
Uh-huh.
had 2 shoulder surgeries. There's some things going on with my hips. I got some tears in the medius, in the minimus glutes. I have.
Well, you're volunteering, obviously,
Yeah.
right? I mean, this
Yeah.
is work, even if you're not getting paid.
I did a project that I worked on for over a year through Vermont Health Life and Vermont Community Fellows within the title of my project, including others of boys.
Good.
And I interviewed previously incarcerated individuals to get their story and to give them a voice into what they felt DOC could use or could do better in changing some of the things. And I'm not about like my grandpa, I always remember him saying, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And it's not a slight on DOC, it's not condemnation or judgment. It's just like, we know the problems. So let's work on the solutions. Let's begin to start to work on the solutions.
Yeah.
And this is a start for me. Seeing this is a start. And I feel it's important to do that. And it's whether somebody accepts Kalani as a trans woman, whether somebody accepts me as or understands it, that's beside the point. I'm a human being. We're all human beings. And it's about protecting everybody. It's not a trans thing. It's protecting all of us, trans and cisgender. And if you don't agree with me, then don't the cisgender women at least be protected? And that's how I view this.
Yeah, no, and you've given us a lot to think about. And having the perspective of someone who's been through it is very, very helpful. I just wanted to see if anyone else wants to speak because we're coming up on our time. Do any of you? Okay. You good? Any questions or? All right, well, we know, I mean, we can contact you.
Yeah.
We have his email or phone call or what's the best way to get him?
Phone call doesn't matter.
All right, all right. Well, thank you very much. This has
You're
been really helpful. Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks.
thank you. Okay, we'll take a very short break.